All right. Welcome to the podcast. My guest today, Kyle Hinkle. He's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu instructor and competitor based out of Boise, Idaho. Actually trains at a great school just down the street from where I train at. His school is called The Base. He was recently promoted to black belt. Can't wait to talk about that. We're going to talk wrestling, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, life, business, whatever comes to mind. Kyle's a friend, and I'm excited to have him on the podcast. Kyle, welcome to the podcast, my brother.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the great introduction there, Jake. I know that we've planned this for a while, and I'm glad our schedules finally lined up. We had some cool occurrences that happened since we last talked, both on and off the mats there. So
for sure,
super excited to take that deeper dive with you.
I love it, man. And again, congratulations on your black belt. Very, very impressive, man. How's it feel? Give me a reflection from the mountaintop.
You know, it's so funny. A lot of people say that like black belt is kind of like that reset belt where you're like, oh, I get to start over and all that. And I couldn't disagree more with that. Yeah. The reason being is I go, well, heck, I'm not going to throw away the past 10 years of my life that I've just gone through, grinded, coached, competed at all levels, from like small, like mom and pop tournaments to some more like international level there.
Yeah.
And so I think that black belt, it's not necessarily starting over. It's just a new window and a new opportunity. Now, I feel like people take it in a bunch of different ways. For me, I spent a lot of time competing as I came up throughout the ranks. Was never an all-star, but I always did pretty darn well when it came to competitions, like from white all the way up to brown. Really enjoyed my competition phase, and I've recently transitioned more into that coaching, advisor, like making sure other people get brought up to that same level and better. Overall goal was to be the worst person in the room. And people always laugh at me about that. But I said, you know, it's kind of a greedy goal as well, because then I constantly get better and I know that I gave back more than I got there.
Oh, that's beautiful, man. That's a beautiful reflection to start the podcast. Yeah. How long have you been doing, like, well, one, I understand you come from a wrestling background. So maybe start taking me through that trajectory. Like, what was it, a family thing? Was it something that you just gravitated toward as a kid? Like, how'd you get into wrestling?
Yeah. And that's kind of a fun story behind that one. If you guys are familiar, the Peel family, Robert and Chase is a professional fighter out of Dan Henderson MMA. Yeah. They also did very, very influential in the martial arts family. And I've been good family friends with Joe, his dad, for a number of years. I actually started with him when I was 4, and then transitioning on when I was around 10 is when I go, you know, I just got done watching the UFC with my dad, and my dad goes, yeah, you got to learn wrestling. I said, oh, well, heck, all right, I'll try it. And so I started wrestling when I was 10, did not have a prestigious start to my wrestling career. My first year in high school, I went 0-28.
Well, what weight class were you wrestling at?
I was 135s, so super light. Each year in high school, I just bumped up 10 pounds, 35, 45, 52, 60. Yeah. And first year, it was funny because I lost 28 in a row. And I told my coach at the time, I said, you know, Chad, his name is Chad Blue. I said, I'm going to wrestle in college. I'm going to get a scholarship for it. And he goes, Kyle, you better study hard because you're not wrestling. And I said, all right, well, I'm going to prove you wrong. Yeah. Well, I like to jokingly say high school was the best 6 years of my life because I went to summer school twice.
There you go.
By the end of my senior year, I was always top 10 in state, national qualifier for Greco. But my coach was right. I didn't get a scholarship opportunity, but because of my academics, I got a full ride up at U of I. Now, when I went up to U of I was a little bit bummed that they didn't have a wrestling program, but I go, heck, I'm going to school for free. I can't be complaining.
Well, U of I doesn't have a wrestling program?
So what they did is they just started up an NAIA program when I went up there. It's like D12, not D1, D2, 3. It's like community college level there. And I go, well, you mind if I walk on and try my hand at that? They go, yeah, sure. No, try it out. And I obviously made the team there and it was super fun. But one thing I noticed is, like most Vandals, I got a little bit overwhelmed with the social life up there, and it's pretty hard to make weight when you're going out with the boys a couple nights a week.
Oh man, U of I is notorious for that. That man, Washington State, man, that's a fun 6 miles up there. That's a good time.
Well, and the food's great up there. The adult refreshments are fantastic and cheap for college kids. And it was funny too because I never missed weight once, no matter how much I went out with the guys.
That's awesome.
But I was a little bit bummed after wrestling in college because I never really got to meet my goals. Again, I was about a 500, maybe 600 wrestler. I'd win one, lose one, so on and so forth. And after wrestling in college, when I got back to Boise, I go, man, I got to do something to fill the void, but wasn't good enough to make it to the Olympics. The idea of getting kicked in the head in MMA didn't sound too hot for me.
Yeah.
And so ironically, I hit up this gentleman by the name of Mitch Coates.
Oh,
So
yeah.
Mitch, fun guy, used to be the old owner of the base, very prestigious, black belt under Gigi Paiva Alliance lineage there. And I actually asked him at first, I go, Mitch, do you guys have any wrestling programs? He goes, no, we do jiu-jitsu. I go, jiu-jitsu? The heck's that? Like in college, I did a little bit of judo and I wrestled like no-gi, but I didn't know it was jiu-jitsu at the time. He goes, it's kind of like wrestling, but slower pace and in pajamas. And I laughed at him. I said, Mitch, no, I'm not going to do that. Well, a couple weeks go by and I go, geez, I'm getting out of shape. I don't really have that edge. I'm lifting weights, but it's not meeting that competition for me. So I go, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and bite the bullet. So I didn't want to be that guy that didn't know how to tie his belt. So I looked up like how to tie your belt. It took me 45 minutes on YouTube, just practicing in my closet.
And by the way, like for anybody who's listening, that's not a jiu-jitsu or in the subculture, there are actually several ways to properly tie a belt, but there are also strong opinions on which one is right.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to navigate when you're not aware of that, I'm sure.
And it's a trip because some of them, you get that typical white belt tie or one tail's pointing up towards your nose, one's going down towards your shoelaces. I go, I don't want to be that guy.
Yeah.
So I watched a couple competition videos and then I learned how to tie my belt there. I go, all right, this is at least acceptable enough so nobody's going to make fun of me. Now, my very first class, I walked into the base and I go, you know what? I wrestled in college. Like I feel like I'd be pretty good at this. Never was I more wrong in my life. I got tapped by this. He must have been 40, purple belt at the time, severely out of shape. He tapped me 6 times in 6 minutes. I go, what the heck just happened? This guy looking like my dad that just kicked off his New Balances and is going to go mow his lawn after class just ate me alive.
Yeah.
And so I was like, all right, I got to get good at this. So I ended up training about 6 days a week when I first started. And I was lucky enough because BJ Butters, the now owner of the base, he just moved back from Virginia. He was a brown belt at the time. And he's a little strapped for cash. And he goes, hey, I'm off. I want to try my hand in coaching. And I'll give you a really good rate. Typical private rate for jiu-jitsu is anywhere from like 100 to 120 an hour.
Right.
Just ballpark range. And he was giving it to me for about 35, 40 bucks. So at the time I was working at the prison, being a little psych tech. I was single. And so I go, I got all this extra income. I might as well invest in myself. And so what I was doing is once a week I'd book a private with BJ and he goes, what do you want to learn? I said, I want to do butterfly and X guard. He goes, well, what about fundamentals like closed guard, half guard? And I jokingly told him, and I still maintain this mindset today. I said, Ben, everything in jiu-jitsu is hard. I at least want to learn the cool stuff.
I love that because there's varying opinions across the gradient there. I like that one. I do like that opinion of like, there's a lot of things we can do with the human body. Let's do the ones that are cool looking too, Well,
and that's half the fun too, right? Like if you think about like wrestling or football, you can practice the same tackle or the same double leg for hours and you still won't master it. Well, jiu-jitsu is the same way. I could berimbolo all day, or I could do a scissor sweep from closed guard. For me, I think closed guard is the hardest guard in jiu-jitsu, and that's laughable to a lot of people. I play purely open guard because I like that dynamic nature behind it.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I was able to really learn how to teach and acquire some additional skills regarding like jiu-jitsu in general. Now, it's funny too. One thing I noticed coming up through the ranks for jiu-jitsu, for people who aren't as familiar, white, blue, purple, brown, black is the general ascension there. When I was a blue belt, I started to notice that I started losing my training partners. I go, what the heck's going on? I talked with BJ and he goes, well, man, like you're just wrestling the whole time. You're grinding. It's super pressure. You're always going for submissions. And I'm like, oh, geez. He's like, not to say that you're a dick, but man, you can do a little bit better on that one. I said, all right.
Oh, yeah.
And so one thing I noticed, and this is hysterical thinking back on it, but if you tap somebody twice in a row, they won't want to roll with you for 2 months. But if you beat them on points, They're like, oh man, thanks for letting me work. I really appreciate it. And I go, but buddy, you just lost by 35 points. I was like, that was a technical like
Well,
pencil whip in there.
well, let me put a pin in this right here, because I'm at that stage right now. I'm a purple belt with a stripe, and I am starting to recognize a little of what you're talking about right now. So, in the spirit of just a stream of consciousness, like what was that? Was that shift? Do you tie that to ego? Do you tie that into like maybe just changing your mindset or what you get out of it? Because right now I could probably dial it back a little bit and focus more on kind of the points. And not sub people as much. And I feel like I'm starting to lose a few training partners, especially at the blue and white level.
And I feel like that's totally normal. One thing, and this is a little bit narcissistic on my end, is I have the belief that anybody can get like a lucky submission, right? Like you can dive on something, you can crank kind of hard and somebody's going to tap, but you don't get a lucky 20 points. And so having that technical prowess, it allows you to not only continually develop, but it keeps your training partners safe. So I'm never worried about hurting my training partners. If I get into a submission position and they don't tap, I go, all right, whatever, I'll just take the back. Right. And so it creates a different culture in the room where people are constantly evolving. When you don't go for submissions, you also have to like transition through more positions. Now, on a lazy perspective, if I have somebody's back, why would I choke you out on the back if I have 3 minutes left and then we restart in a 50-50 position? Because when you tap, again, for people that aren't as familiar, you just restart either standing or on your knees, slap hands. Both people have equal opportunity. I'd rather camp on your back in an 80-20 advantage there for the rest of that round and then work on my own game from there.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you're focusing then maybe on maintaining control. You're peeping out what you have. You're being but you're passing on a lot of stuff.
Yeah. And I always like to play super light. So not like punishing pressure. For me, I feel like jiu-jitsu is best done where your training partner isn't physically frustrated, because there's some guys that I've trained with that are absolute units, like that make Jocko feel soft.
Oh, damn.
And fantastic training partners and nothing wrong with their game. But for me, I never wanted to be the guy that camped in mount for 4 minutes, right? I'm like, oh, I'm bigger than you. And so what I would do is if I get to mount, I hold on to it long enough to get my points. Then I transition back to like knee on belly, let my partner regain the guard. And then both of us get a work. They get that dynamic. All right, I get a recover. I get gradual resistance. And then I get a whole new opportunity to pass, sweep, submit, everything like that, just by letting them get back to a position where they have a fighting chance there.
Do you feel like it takes away from your game though? Because I've tried this where I've kind of backed in and out of positions. Like I've backed out and allowed myself to someone to maybe get close guard on me. But I feel like that's I guess what I struggle with is such a unnatural way of moving the discipline of like jiu-jitsu is like moving back into a position where it's a disadvantage for you, where like my mindset is always just like forward. And it's like, am I creating bad techniques subconsciously by allowing somebody an opportunity to gain?
And I get what you're saying there, but one thing that might help you with the gamesmanship of competition there is you'll see it in a lot of very high-end competitors. Well, they'll let their opponent get a guard back just so they can get another 3 points for passing. And so really, it depends on your strategy and gamesmanship when you go into competition there. Some people like to win off submissions. Other people like to win off points. The ones that I don't like to watch like to win off of that one advantage for an almost sweep.
Those are boring.
Yeah. Oh, it's terrible. Or like when you see those heavyweight matches where they just kick ankles for 2 minutes, it drives me up a wall.
Oh yeah.
So for me, I think that changing like the mindset or developing out that game plan, for me, I always like to win off of points. Because points, I feel like I could maintain the pace. I could choose like when I wanted to put on the gas. I could stay just one level above my partner. So the reason why I say that is, let's say we both start, we're 50-50. I get one advantage. Now they have to risk that much. But with that risk, I get a little bit more. Then they have to risk more. Then they have to risk, and then you can get the submission where they have to risk everything to get ahead.
Yeah.
And so it's just different mindsets on competition and training and how you approach roles. So that's why when you said, do I think that's making me regress? I'm like, Yes. It's both
Okay.
making you regress a little bit, but it's also giving you the opportunity to experiment with new gamesmanship. Like, hey, if I just have hit that same pass 4 times in a row, now I'm going to mix it up and do something else.
Yeah, and it sounds like if you're aware that that's what you're doing, as opposed to just getting used to doing that,
Mm-hmm.
um, that's my fear, is that I'll back out into a poor position because I'm not moving to that next advantage that you were just talking about. But again, I think it's just the awareness and where you're at in your game. If I'm not good enough to apply that logic in my jujitsu, then maybe it's not time that yet. You know
Well,
what I mean?
and it's so funny too, because some people, they're like, I should start in a bad position, and I couldn't disagree more. I'd rather let somebody work into that bad position, because then I can see that evolution of how they swept me, how they pass. Like, let's say I want to work on bottom side control escapes. I'm not just going to lay on my back and let them get in top side. I'm going to still start in like either a guard or a passing position. I'm going to see what they do to sweep me. And then as I get to that position, I want to make sure my frames are in the right spot. And so that way I can see the progression from a neutral position, their advantage, to their score. And then based off of that, then I can identify different elements that I could have done to either prevent that, or as I'm falling into that position, conceding it in a way in which I can also return the rally there, or volley back with them. Because you'll see in a lot of very high-end competition, they'll give up a sweep to get a sweep and a pass.
Sure.
And so like they'll fall to their back, but they'll fall with their grips. Then as they re-sweep, then they have a quick pass. So that way you give up 2 to take 5. So you're netting 3 points.
Understood.
Mm.
Well, that again. I compete, but I'm not like deep in that. I've done maybe 10 tournaments, something like that.
Yeah.
So it's like I'm still trying to figure out my game. But I appreciate you parking the car there for a minute and let me hop in with you.
No worries.
You were taking me through your progression here. You said that you were taking privates, you were advancing pretty, training 6 days a week. That's a lot.
Yeah.
And taking privates on top of that as well. It's quite a bit. So I imagine you made your way, especially with a wrestling background, through the belts, with the time commitment and then also the skill, probably pretty quickly there.
Yeah, I'd say, because I started late 2013, and then I just got my black belt on the 15th.
Okay.
And so it was a good transition there. Typical time frame for black, and I hate saying typical time frame because it's not like an average belt that people receive. But what I've seen is between 8 to 10 years is that like general. It's not a taekwondo school where, and not saying all taekwondo schools are like this, where you're a black belt after 12 months.
Yeah.
Where you pay the instructor ahead of time. They're like, all right, this is the date that you're getting it. And so I have a big thing with words. I feel like words matter. When people are like, oh, you deserve this, I go, nah, you don't deserve anything. You earn everything.
Yeah.
And so that's the one part where I will be a Karen on people, because people will ask me, they're like, well, I think that I deserve to be bumped up to the next level. I said, I don't think you deserve anything. Like, you're complaining that you're getting swept or that you're running out of gas, but I'm like, have you earned the right to sweep someone back, or have you earned that endurance so you're not sucking wind after the 3rd minute in the first round? And so it changes your perspective on things for that regard, in which you're like, what am I willing to give up in order to get better? Now, jiu-jitsu, I do always recommend warming up. I don't always do it. So I wish I could practice what I preach there. But one thing that people always bring up to me, especially when they're just starting and they're very ambitious competitors, they're like, Kyle, I want to win worlds. I go, awesome. What's your workout routine? What's your recovery looking like? Are you willing to have any surgeries? They go, what? I said, well, look at the average competitor. Lovato Jr. tore his pec. Cyborg barely has knees. Gordon Ryan's had multiple knee surgeries there. I said, if you want to compete at that high level, you kind of have to run yourself through the meat grinder there.
Yeah.
Now, I've had very, very unfortunate luck with surgeries. I just finished up with surgery 6, had both my knees replaced, rotator cuff. I jokingly say I got a boob job before my fiance because I had my pec reattached. And then recently I had my bicep reattached there. Now, one thing I did notice, and this is really funny, my physical stature started diminishing, but then you start to increase your technical stature, because I'm like, look, I can't quite just muscle through this. So I need to learn more technique behind this in order to still compete at that level. And I'm not the biggest guy in the gym. I'm about Tom Cruise height. I'm 5'9", buck 70, buck 75.
Yeah.
I'm generally the smallest person in the gym there. Most of my training partners are like 190, 220. Very few that are like 150 to 180.
Dude, you guys had some monsters in that gym too. He's at the base, man. I remember just seeing photos sometimes, and I know he's since left, but like Phil Shiplett, man.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
What a beast.
Yeah. 6'4", like 270, old Marine dude. Like he just got his black belt as well.
Yeah.
And, I mean, he's funny because he goes, Kyle, I train 7 days a week. I said, well, Phil, like, let's do a little comparison here. He goes, what do you mean? I said, Phil, I weigh about 170, right? He goes, yeah. I said, you weigh about 270, right? He goes, yeah. I said, well, how do you think I do against 70-pound opponents? He goes, oh, you'd absolutely don't. And then he paused and he goes, oh, shoot.
That's funny, man.
Yeah. And so it's all about perspective. And I have the utmost respect for those big guys. I know Keith and Alex Owen. Yeah. I've known Alex since I was a little kid. We wrestled together. I knew him back when he was going to try his hand for MMA. I've always been super amicable with Keith.
Yeah.
Great school, great program. I believe he's a Pedro Sauer guy.
Yeah, that's why I trained, man. I did train under Keith. I'm a big fan of him, big fan of the Pedro Sauer Association as well. So I appreciate the shout out on that.
Yeah. And again, I'll never have anything bad to say about another gym. I think jiu-jitsu is jiu-jitsu, right? Especially with as many people have been moving from California. Idaho is oddly becoming a bit of a mecca.
Yeah.
And so whenever people come into the gym, they go like, hey, how should I pick a gym? I said, I'm just going to be honest. You're going to be able to learn good jiu-jitsu anywhere in Idaho.
Yeah.
Like, there's going to be black belts at every gym. I'm like, you have to go off of culture.
Dude, and then like even like places like Sun Valley, man. There's what's his name? Joey? Is it Joey Bowie or whatever? Joel Bowie.
I want to say there's a Enzo Gracie Academy out there, isn't there?
Probably, dude. It's when I started was 2015, and there was like 4 schools.
Yeah.
And now like you do a search and there's and now there's everywhere. I mean, there's multiple schools in Nampa, multiple schools, and lots of schools in Meridian. Actually, like it's a ton.
Dude, if you want to see something just wacky, you should look up the base, and within a 6-mile radius, I think there's like 6 or 8 schools that are just popping up. There's the base, there's Rain, there's going to be a Gracie Baja just right
up. The Specters down the road. What in a great school they are. Like there's awesome stuff going on in the valley for sure.
Brad Bentley, he was a black belt under SVG.
Yeah. He just started Progress. Is that what they call it?
Process with the diamond there. Yeah. We also have a cool guy, Matt Edgley. I can't pronounce his last name. He was a Keenan Cornelius black belt. He's also coming up. He's going to be right next to like Edwards.
Yeah.
We have a guy who trained at AOJ. I think his name's Andrew Thomas, who's going to be opening up like TAC team jiu-jitsu, like whole bunch of just explosion of schools in the valley.
Wow. Yeah, that's it's interesting to reflect on because it's like, there has been a huge movement. Like I am one of those guys, arguably got into jiu-jitsu. I had a striking background and I listened to the Joe Rogan podcast and I was overweight and I had a on it sticker on my computer at work and a coworker trained jiu-jitsu. And he goes, do you train jiu-jitsu? And I'm like, why? And he's like, because you probably take Alpha Brain. You probably listen to Joe Rogan. And I'm like, well, I do take Alpha Brain. I do listen to Joe Rogan. And he goes, well, you need to show up to jiu-jitsu class, man. Here's where I go. And that was 6 years ago. I've just been grinding ever since. It's funny. I think there's a lot of people like that who have just run into somebody that said, hey, this completely changed my perspective on so many things in my life. You should go. And now there's, 20 schools in just one geography. Valley.
Well, and that's just the cool part about jiu-jitsu is the culture behind it. You have everyone from those hardcore competitors to the kind of like hobbyist dads who's like, oh, thank God I don't have to like hang out with the kids or mow the lawn or clean my grill for 2 hours. I can turn my phone off and kind of just get in that Zen mindset there. Because as you're getting choked, I'm not thinking about work goals or any quotas or anything like that. And so I think that's one of like the beauties of jiu-jitsu there.
Well, and then there's people too that always make me feel like I'm not working near as hard. So Cameron Ross, Cameron's a good friend of mine.
That guy's an absolute unit.
He is, dude. He comes over to the garage and trains sometimes. We're actually going to go down to Vegas and watch ADCC in person together September 2022. But like I just watch this guy every single day. He's posting something online about how he's getting better in jiu-jitsu. And I'm like, I'm having a hard time fitting it in. I love doing it, but I'm like, I don't know if I love it as much as Cameron does. You know what I mean?
That guy, if passion was a person, it would be named Cameron Ross.
100%.
And that cat, I mean, he very dynamic, lots of muscle confusion. Training with him, he's very, I hate using the word robotic because sometimes it has that negative side effect, but it is very, very diligent.
Yeah.
So every move has a purpose. Every form has a function there. And nothing wrong with that. I feel like that's how a lot of really high-end elite athletes are made. For me, I don't process that way. If I do the same move for like 5 minutes in a row, I'm bored. I'm picking my nose. I'm wanting to get off the mat. And so I like to have that really dynamic approach. Like, I'm like, hey, I'm going to do this. Give me a different response. I'm going to do this. Give me a different response. Not saying either one's better or worse. And I appreciate his grind mentality. I do that in my sales job, but I'm like, in jiu-jitsu, man, I can't do it. That my brain just doesn't follow that mold.
Well, and we went to the Origin camp together.
The immersion one?
Yeah, the immersion camp. So we're just 7 days of jiu-jitsu. And we're training, 7-8 hours a day while you're there. Yeah. And at least 4 hours a day, we're partnered together and it's just like, he's just over and over and over. Just there's no like talking chit chat on the side of the mat. All right, let's drill that again. Let's drill it again. Let's drill it again. You're like, yeah, I'm getting better, but man, I really am getting tired.
Yeah. And like all of a sudden you start realizing like the areas of your body where I'm like, God, I didn't even know my back could be sore there. Like, why are my calves burning? Why are my grips destroyed? Why do my hands look like the crepe keeper from all the grips and stuff like that?
Yeah, that's God, that's good stuff. Yeah, you're right, man. It does really bring a community together. It brings people from all walks of life together and really focuses in on something that's physically taxing and mentally taxing, ego dissolving, as they say, high stakes human chess, as they say. But what an incredible sport. Do you find now that you try to go back to some of your wrestling roots and like work that in, or how have you like, do you continually evolve your wrestling part of your jiu-jitsu game? Is it all one thing to you? Is it divorced? Like, maybe riff on that a little bit.
It's funny you bring that up because as long as I did wrestle, I wrestled for about 14 years of my life. Most people that I roll with never knew. I completely threw it away like last week's garbage. Yeah. It's very funny because if people say like, Kyle, let's do stand-up. Oh, sure, no problem. And I'm one of those dirty guard pullers where I just sit right to guard and I start playing from there. And they go, Kyle, if you know how to do takedowns, you did this for a majority of your life. Why? I said, well, it's not really as efficient. Like, I don't feel like the juice is worth a squeeze. And again, unpopular opinion in the jiu-jitsu community for that. But breaking it down on an efficiency level, it's much easier to sweep than to pass somebody's guard. Right. And then as I pull guard, I get to establish all my grips. I'm in a very I already move it from 50-50 to 70-30 just from pulling a guard and establishing my grips. Then if I cut an angle, then it's 80-20. And that's 80% of me getting 2 and 20% of you getting 3. And so I'm very objective with my breakdown on movements. And so I'm willing to risk as long as the reward is worth way more.
Okay. That makes sense. So you're not necessarily like really trying to separate the wrestling from the jiu-jitsu part. You've really evolved into a submission grappler, more of what you would consider a jiu-jitsu athlete over the years.
Yeah. Like very much like points position player on that one. Now, every now and again, I definitely have to scramble, and I thank wrestling for that one. We actually had this one cat, he just came into the base and I think he was a blue belt or something. He goes, we slap hands, and I typically start on my knees there. He goes, no, let's start standing. I said, oh, man, we don't have to do that. He goes, no, I want to do just takedown. Oh, Jesus. Okay. And I just think he's a normal guy. And then all of a sudden we slap hands. He shoots in on this. I go, Jesus. Sprawl, and we restart. And after the roll, we had a great exchange there, takedowns. And he goes, where'd you wrestle? I said, oh, for a really crap school. He goes, oh, I wrestled for St. John State. I go, oh, well, it shows. Like,
yeah.
And so he's like, you wrestle for NA? I was like, oh man, I haven't wrestled in forever. Like, it's not my jam. I don't quite enjoy it as much as I used to. And I was like, everything hurts when you do takedowns. That's when I feel a majority of injuries happen. Yeah. And so I'm like, I'm willing to do the dance every now and again. But again, I'm looking for that longevity there in training. So What are your thoughts on the takedown versus guard pull debacle?
You know what? I like playing off my back. So I get taken down a lot in tournaments, or I try to pull guard. I mean, I'm not, to be completely honest, I've got two really bad knees, probably, I don't know if it's a similar story. I have a torn ACL on my left knee, and I tear my meniscus in my right knee all the time. And it takes me out for 6 to 8 months at a time. Like I'm in actual like physical walking pain. So I've just kind of learned to like lock up and then try to pull as much guard as I can. Cause I always get hurt on the exchanges from standing. And I end up doing all right on my back. So for me, that's what works. Or at least that's where my game is. But I've been known to shoot. I get a decent double when I really want it.
Yeah.
And I'm terrible at single leg game. I'm so bad at keeping that leg. I'm so bad at pinching around it, or, running the pipe through, or all the things that you're supposed to do. I do it poorly.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because they focus so much on the finish, but really for takedowns, like it's all in the setup and getting to the finishing is the easiest part.
Yeah.
The setting up is the hardest part. Like once you get in and you have a good like grip setup and you have body position, you should be able to finish a lot of those shots. But most people are so adept at, especially in a gi, they grab your collar, they push you back, they limit your grips there. So I like it because it slows down the game and it gives people less physical attributes, like the opportunity to really fight back there. Yeah. I think that in a gi, it's a lot like rock climbing because you have a whole bunch of different grips, and you'll see some people who are super dynamic and they dyno and they do all that cool. And in jiu-jitsu, think of that as like cartwheel passing, the barambolos, like that flashy clout stuff. And then there's also the people who pull that old school game, like they play the close guard, half guard, old school De La Hiva, really lock you down, stuff like that.
Yeah, I find that at this point in my game, and we were starting to talk about it before we started the podcast, which is, I've just been playing so much open guard and just focusing on being comfortable on both sides of my hips, just either facing either way, fighting off grips either way, being able to set that Kimura trap and just being a little more ambidextrous from open guard. So it doesn't matter which way the fight goes. In fact, if you like to play on your right side, I'll force you left all day. Yeah. I'm going to force you that way, and I'm comfortable that way. And I get a lot of subs sometimes on guys who maybe I shouldn't, just because I'm forcing them to the side they don't want to play on.
Yeah. I very jokingly say I have a black belt side and a white belt side.
That's the way I feel too, man.
Now, I'd like to say that because I've been practicing so long, I can force a lot more into that same position. But I think that you're 100% correct. When I'm feeling feisty, I'm like, you know what? I know this guy only passes to his left. I'm going to play to my right. Yeah. And they go, what the heck? And it gives you at least that moment to at least sit back up, scramble up, repull. Just things like that, just to mix up that flow. Because instead of having that linear or that like flat line, you kind of spike and then dip and spike and dip. And so controlling the pace is so critical for all elements of jiu-jitsu, from passing to playing guard, sweeping to submitting. I mean, heck, half my submission attempts, I'm just trying to get the back. I don't care if I get the armbar or not. I just want positional dominance.
Yeah. And so, speaking of that, you earlier in the podcast, you mentioned that you were kind of going through a transition from competition to coaching, right? Are you still planning on competing?
Yeah. With that one, it's funny. People ask me that all the time. I'd love to. But again, I'm kind of giving myself some time to like fully recover there and kind of get back into that competition mindset. My bicep, again, I'm about 5 months out. So it's only about like 85% there.
Gotcha.
Still functional. I did like a first couple pull-ups the last day. I said, oh, okay, cool. It's not going to break, but I'm constantly like sitting here, grabbing him like, all right, it's still attached. It's still attached.
It's still attached.
Like,
it's such a,
yeah.
It's still there.
It's just like a mental block for me on that one. I am excited to kind of, because I am creeping up on 30. I'm 29 now. March, I'll step up to that dirty 30 Masters division, and I'm going to be excited for that one. Not necessarily because I don't enjoy competing in adult, but I'm going to enjoy the aspect of competing against other people who have lives outside of jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. Well, you just made me feel old, man, because like I'm only 6 years older than you, but I started jiu-jitsu at the age you are right now.
Yeah.
Which, still you're a black belt. It's always hard for me to wrap my head around, stuff like that. You know what I mean?
Well, dude, and like the new generation of kids that are coming up, and the new generation, like the 20-year-old black belts,
Or you look at the Pedigo submission fighting, all that Daisy Fresh,
yeah.
all those guys, like all they're doing is living in the gym, eating and sleeping it every day. Some of the best athletes of the world are gravitating to that team. It's like, I mean, they've got the time, 10 hours a day. What am I going to do? I'm a 35-year-old dad in suburbia.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
I can't.
The last couple times I competed there, like the last couple big losses, I should say, it's all against people who do jujitsu full time.
Yeah.
Like, man, I still grind about 55 hours a week for work, 55, 60 there.
Yeah.
I coach kids. I try and compete. Well, not compete, but I should say train about 5 to 6 days a week now. And so it's just different from somebody who they're paid to do this.
Yeah.
They wake up in the morning, they get a lift in, they get a recovery, they get their meals delivered to them, like their nutrition is on point, their workout routine's on point. They have a whole team behind them.
Yeah.
Well, the more like hobbyists, I'm like, look, man, like I can still compete with them. Like throughout my competition days, like I was always top 150 IBJJF. Again, never breaking that 100, but not a slouch.
No, for sure.
One thing I noticed is, again, I'm like, man, I wish I could just dedicate and be like, sweet, I don't have to do anything but train today. Fantastic. Can't wait. But that's just not how life works. And so that's why transitioning over to masters, I'm like, all right, cool. I'm going up against people who are training the same as me. Like they still have to go home. I like the old man banter anyways. Like, hey man, my left knee's kind of janky. Then they're like, my right shoulder's kind of bugging me. So you're like, all right, I'll avoid knee bars. You avoid Kimuras. Cool. Like social contract status.
I love it, dude. That I remember was maybe this time last year, maybe a little before. That was Submission Underground 17.
Yeah.
Was that the last time you competed?
Yeah, it was. And that one, it was funny too, because I hadn't competed no-gi for years. And I had the awesome opportunity to go out there and I don't train leg locks per se or anything like that. I'm a gi guy. I train in a gi 5-6 days a week. And had an opportunity to compete. Very good competitor. His name is Chase Davis. Hats off to him. He's published on BJJ Fanatics. Really good cat. We became immediate friends before the competition, and afterwards we still stay in touch and everything. Kid got his black belt far before mine. Really cool cat. Our match wasn't super long there. I think it was like about 2 minutes. Fun exchange. He ended up getting a great inside heel hook. It was funny too, as I was lifting him up, we heard this loud pop. I go, what the hell? Because I was an X. I started lifting him up. I heard this pop, pop, pop. And I froze for a second. He fell back and got my ankle. And I said, oh, man, I got to work tomorrow. I tapped. We got together later. He goes, bro, I blew out my LCL. I said, oh, dude, like I never want anybody to like get hurt or anything like that. Just a really weird, like freakish occurrence there.
Well, if I remember that match correct, because I watched it. I mean, that Sub Underground 17 card was stacked. The Craig Jones, it's Mason Fowler. It was, Richie Martinez was on that. Roberto Jimenez, a friend of mine who's actually been on the podcast, Phil Schwartz was on that as well. Like, dude, the card was so good.
Fantastic.
But I think when you started that match, you were grabbing far side, like reaching behind. You're kind of in this weird, like kind of little shin guard or some kind of like half. And you were reaching behind. And I remember the announcer said something along the lines of like, I don't know what he's trying to set up here. Do you have what were you setting up?
X guard. So you have to grab over the hip and then you have one knee. If I'm approaching his left leg, I have my foot right behind his knee and then my left foot behind his knee and my right foot up on his hip. And then typically you use that to stand up your opponent and then you can trip from there. You can take the back. It's a very dynamic position.
Yeah.
Works fantastic in a gi because you get all these grips.
Yeah.
No gi, it's a little bit trickier because I have to like grab some meat above their leg and really lock that in that way.
Yeah, well, he was definitely stuck there that first minute or so, like as you guys were working around that. And then as you said, you guys had a scramble kind of exchange, and sounds like legs were grabbed there. But it was a fun match to watch, man. It was cool to see somebody that on such a cool card, man. So again, congrats to you for being at that level. It's fun to see.
It is super fun. And it's funny too, because I always tell people, I'm like, dude, I've lost a lot more than I've won. And just to have the opportunity to do stuff like that, I got to meet Chael while I was out there, and he's such a funny guy.
Oh, dude.
We have kind of similar senses of humor in that regard, where he goes up, he's like, oh, hey, how are you? I said, oh, my name's Kyle. It's like, are you supposed to be like popular or something? Are you announcing this? What's going on? Just totally messing with him. And he's like, I already like you.
Dude, he's notorious for that, kind of that deadpan, like, who the fuck are you type mentality.
Yeah.
So I love it.
And so when he got that back, he laughed at me and he's like, "Oh no, man, good luck today." He's like, "Keep your head up." And he goes, "First one don't." Afterwards, we were talking. He's like, first one doesn't count anyways." He's like, "Thanks for coming in. You train in a gi. It's like anytime you want to compete again for us, let us know."
Yeah.
And so I'm like, "Oh, sweet." So I might take another gi match down the road. I'll have to go play around with legs a little bit more though first. Again, I'm like you, man. My knees are kind of wonky. And so I don't like to train legs just because I'm like, dude, I got enough problems.
Yeah. No, I did this. No joke. Well, dude, like, so you were talking about that kind of balance. Are you in balance right now? Work, life, jujitsu, all those things. Like, what's your mindset day to day right now? Like, is your cup full, or do you still have kind of unfinished business in some of these areas?
So, kind of a yes question to that one.
Yeah.
Or answer, I should say. Now, my schedule is pretty routine there. Normally, I wake up around 5. I get ready for work. I write out all my notes for the demos that I'm going to talk. I'm off at 4:30. I go and coach kids every day from 5 to 6, and then I typically train from 6 to 8. And so that's like my normal routine there. Now I am going to have a little bit more free time. So I'm going to start like incorporating some additional like working out and training there and really just getting my body back to where it should be, not the off-season athlete build that I'm running right now.
Yeah.
My biggest like next goal, because I'm a big goals guy, is I'm trying to buy in to the base with BJ to be a partial owner there. So personal and like business endeavors are going to start colliding a little bit more and meshing.
There you go.
And so super excited for that. Very ambitious plan. My goal was to be a partial owner before 30. So I have until March.
There you go. That's awesome. Does that mean potentially another location, or what's that mean?
That's a great question. For me, I'm not a big fan of having like multiple locations, especially remember we were just talking about how there's 6
saturated.
locations.
Yeah.
I'd rather like expand out and make it so that there's more mat space there. And because they're in such a good location, just right off Franklin and Maple Grove.
Yeah.
And so it's it's well respected. It's been around for 15 years there. Everyone knows it. People often ask me, they're like, "What do you think about new gyms like popping up?" I said, I think it's fantastic. They're like, are you worried about students leaving? I said, no. I think it's more of like the students who are already established at a gym, they're going to maintain, but the amount of new signups is going to diminish a little bit there.
Yeah. Well, and I've also had another question here. So you work at Tabootie, which was founded by Troy McLean, who's a jiu-jitsu competitor once upon a time, and somebody who's trained for a long time. You get a little extra work-life balance there for being a jiu-jitsu guy?
Honestly, man, Tabootie is such a cool like culture company because Troy, he hires athletes, assassins, and unicorns. Well,
wait. Say that again. I love that saying. Say that again.
It's a classic Troyism. Athletes, assassins, and unicorns. Athletes, people who do jiu-jitsu, college level athletes, team members there. Assassins, so people who are like very invested, they go, "Hey, look, I'm always going after it." And then unicorns, which is just somebody they're super quirky, but god damn, they're good at what they do.
Yeah.
Like that guy that can write like 15 pages of code in an hour. And you're like, I don't know how you do it, man. You're a jack of all trades. And Troy's so funny because he's so culture focused. When I first was talking to Troy about switching over to Tabootie, he laughed at, I kind of laughed at him. He goes, "Kyle, I want you to try this out. I want your resume on my desk in 2 weeks." I go, "Troy, solitaire is the apex of my technology understanding. Get out of here. No way."
Yeah.
And 2 weeks, I go, "You know what, Troy, I'm going to take a leap of faith. Why not?" And so I put in my 2 weeks notice. I interviewed, and the guy who interviewed me, he was funny. He goes, "Yeah, man, you don't have the job." I go, "Excuse me?" And I go, "Hey, man, I just quit my job." He's like, "Yeah, you have no sales experience, no tech experience." And I was like, "I hate to be rude or Karen to you, but your CEO said I had the job. So when am I starting?"
That's beautiful. Yeah, of course.
And so that was about 2 years ago from today. And I've totally loved that transition over and working for somebody who, again, Troy does embody that jiu-jitsu culture within the company. And we like to talk smack back and forth. It's never rude, but it's always just like that locker room, like military jab here, jab there, all on the same page. And it's cool because Troy's a brown belt. We have James Hansen, who's a brown belt. They both train at Alliance. DJ Dickman, he's a purple belt. I think we just hired on a new cat. He's blue or something like that. And so Troy uses a lot of like jiu-jitsu mannerisms and sayings like on and off the mat throughout all of like our L10 meetings and stuff. And so it's funny because everybody gets a little lesson in jiu-jitsu jargon.
Oh man, you guys are, and you just use that L10 meeting. You guys are all on EOS, then I take it too.
Yeah.
I love it.
And so it's funny too, because Troy, he's such a character. I mean, Troy's everybody's friend. Like there's not one person that I've talked to that's like, oh, I hate that. And everybody's like, Troy, down to earth, moral, honest, ethical, very culturally sound. He wants rising ships type of guy.
Yeah. Well, he and I have a mutual contact. And when the guy's name's Bedros Cooley, and when Bedros was in town, he invited me to dinner, and Troy happened to be there. And I couldn't agree with you more. Like you're instantly captivated by like just this really interesting guy who's always saying something fun, positive, uplifting, impactful. And you're like, yeah, man, like I'll hang out with you anytime.
And all of it's like mannerisms that like raspy old, like, come here, like, I'm going to be your best. Like you immediately want to be the best man at your wedding just from talking with him for 10 minutes. Like he's one of those guys where I'm like, you're going to slay any speech I give to you. You don't even have to prep for it. Just overall sweet guy. He'd be an awesome person to have on a podcast, by the way.
You know, he and I talked about it last year, and then we just kind of fell off each other's calendars, but I'll have to reach back out to his admin and see about setting that up, especially after having you on as well.
Yeah.
Well, brother, is there, you know, you're a wealth of knowledge, man. What a fun perspective you shared with me today. Like, is there anything that you're top of mind that you're thinking about, like knowledge you want to share? If I can, anything that's top of mind?
Dude, honestly, I feel like we had a fantastic little like podcast session today. We talked about origins, development, future pacing, like all that jazz for how jiu-jitsu has evolved, not only in the Valley, and then like different ideas of gamesmanship. Yeah. It's been fun just to like shoot the breeze with you, kind of pick your brain, you pick my brain. I'd love to have like a follow-up podcast if you want, just like a part 2 there. I know it took us a little bit to do this because we both have kind of crazy schedules, but it's super fun just to talk with somebody that's same like ambition-minded, big goal setter, never being stagnant. So I'm always happy to do that for you.
All right, brother. Well, we'll find some time maybe in the summer and just we'll do part 2 of this and kind of expand and continue to share something that we both enjoy doing, which is jiu-jitsu, and maybe we'll dive into business and all kinds of other stuff that you know, you and I could talk about all day.
Yeah, something like a trio, even like with Cameron Ross, or I'll pick Troy's brain and be like, Troy, I got a guy. Come on, just set aside an hour.
Dude, don't threaten me with a good time. We could do that live, man. We'll figure it all out. All right, my man. Well, hey, where do people find you on social media? Are you promoting any of your handles or anything like that?
Oh, for that one, I just do Kyle Hinkle 9 for Instagram, or just Kyle Hinkle on Facebook. Yeah. I'm a bit of a slouch on social media there. I appreciate the shout out. I like to post every now and again, but I know Cam Ross or just Jordan Jiu-Jitsu or
just Jordan. That's another fun page, dude.
That guy is a trip. I always joke with him. I'm like, hey man, because I'll post like a little bit of like a joke comment, and then I'll personal message him and be like, hey man, I'm just messing with you. He goes, oh no, I love it. And I'm like, oh, thank God. So.
Well, man, again, what a pleasure to have you on. Thanks for sharing the time, sharing the knowledge. Thanks for being a positive force for this sport in the Valley as well, man. We're so lucky to have black belts like you walking around, sharing knowledge and making our community stronger and better. And next time you and I get together, I hope that it's on the podcast or maybe before personally. So take care, my friend.
You got it. Sounds great, brother. Well, again, appreciate you. Have a great rest of your day, Jake.
All right, cheers.